Use the media to cause a mass hysteria. They trying to create the illusion that we terrorists.
What's up, Reflections? I am Harlem, the Sacred Numerologist. Welcome back to my channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to be tuned in and updated for future content, because I'm going to be dropping plenty gems all over the channel about a multitude and a myriad of different things. So make sure you stay tuned. Okay, but today we are going to be talking about the basics of the game of chess. Now, I know some people may be wondering, like, okay, what does chess have to do with sacred geometry or numerology? Well, it actually has, even though certain people may not play it with the understanding that you're using it, the way that your conscious mind works is numeric, and it's based off patterns, which is geometry. So even when you're playing the game, you're counting the spaces, which is numbers. You're making patterns with your movements, which is geometry. So it's very numeric and geometric. So I'm also going to be doing a segment where I break down how you can use sacred geometry and numerology as a strategy in the chess game. But that's going to be a whole nother video. But today we're going to talk about the basics of the chess game, chess 101 or chess 101. I will also be offering one-on-one lessons for people, because I can actually utilize the chess game and the board to build people's minds. And what I do is I'll know based on the patterns that you're doing on the board, I can tell how you think in certain ways that you move in actual life, which will in turn allow me to help you build up certain attributes on the board, which translate into different actions in your everyday life. So it's a very beneficial thing. We could set up some one-on-one lessons if you want to get more of a personal approach with learning the game. So definitely can contact me. You can contact me with at Harlem, the Sacred Numerologist at gmail.com if you want to book a one-on-one session. But right now we are going to move into the actual board, and we're going to start the lessons for the basics. Okay, so I'm not going to be going into strategy as much. I'm really just going to break down how the game is played and leave strategy for another segment. So we have the pieces first, right? First, we will talk about the pieces. So first piece that we're going to talk about is the pawn. Now, I'm sure that most people are familiar with the pawn. They've been used in a bunch of different metaphoric ways where people talk about things, don't be the pawn on the chessboard type of thing, right? But the pawn is actually a very impactful piece on the board for multiple reasons. Now, this piece can move up one space, or on the first one, it can move up two spaces. The piece cannot move backwards. It can only move forwards, and it can only move one space at a time besides the first time it moves. So each one of these pieces, on the first move that it makes, it gets to make a choice between moving two spaces or moving one. But after that, it can only move one space. Now, in order for it to take a piece, because in chess, instead, like in checkers, you jump pieces. In chess, you actually take the pieces. So in order for this piece to take another piece, it has to be on the space that is diagonal to it. So if this piece was to move here, then this piece could take this piece, and when you take the piece, you just move into the space, and now this piece gets taken off the board. And now if I was on this side, I would now have my opponent's pawn. So now I've taken that piece, but it can take any piece that is diagonal to it one space. So it can only move up one space, and it can only take a piece if it is diagonal to it one space over. Second piece we will talk about is the rook. So now the rook actually can move any amount of spaces, left, right, up, or down. It can move any amount of spaces, horizontal or vertical. So it can move any amount of spaces up, down, left, or right. Now, when it comes to it being in the back row, right? So for right now, it cannot actually move anywhere because it can't jump over any pieces. So although it can move any amount of spaces, there has to be an open space for it to move forward. Now, let's say that the opponent's piece is in front of it, or the opponent's piece is to the side of it. Well, then the rook would be able to take the other piece by moving into the space. So it could take that piece, it could take this piece, it can take any piece that is in front of it or to the side of it, because it can move any amount of spaces, either one. So that's what the rook can do. So the third piece we will talk about is the knight. Okay, so now easy way to remember this one is, a knight on a horse, because the piece looks like a horse. So it's easy to remember this one as the knight. Okay, so the second piece, or the third piece we'll talk about, is the knight. The knight moves in a very particular way. It moves in a very odd way. So it moves over one space, up two. So let's move it out of the way of the other pieces. So let's say it can move over two spaces, up one or down one. As long as it's 2 and 1, it can move. So it can move over 2, up 1. It can move down 2, over 1. It can move up 2, over 1. It can move right 2, down 1. As long as the combination is 2 vertical or horizontal and then 1 vertical or horizontal, the opposite, then it can move there. But it has to be 1, 2, 1 or 1, 1, 2. So the knight is the actual piece, the only piece on the board that can jump over other pieces. So it can actually move in the beginning without because whereas, like, for example, the rook, right, cannot move unless the pawn is out of the way for it to move forward. So right now, the rook can't move until we move a pawn. The knight can jump over these pieces and move here, because that's over 1, up 2. So it allows it to go over other pieces. It's the only piece on the board that can do that. You feel me? So it can move into places before any pawns are moved out of the way. And it can take any piece that's on any space that's occupied of where it can move. So, like, for example, right now, it can move 8 different places. It can move, I apologize. It can move 8 different places if it's like this. So we'll be able to move 8 different places, right? It can move over 1, down 2. It can move over 1, down 2. It can move over 2, up 1. It can move over 2, up 1. It can move up 2, over 1. And it can move up 2, over 1. So it has a multitude of different places it can move. So, and also, if that wasn't there, it can move there. So basically, if there's any piece on of the opponents on any one of those spaces, the knight would be able to take it. So if I was here and the opponent was here, I could take that piece. So with any piece on the chessboard, in order for you to take it, it has to be on the space that it would move into, and you would just basically take that piece. So that would be the knight. Now we will talk about the bishop. So the bishop, right? The bishop can actually move any amount of spaces in either direction that is diagonal. So it can move any diagonal direction, any amount of spaces. This is another piece that cannot jump over pieces. So in order for it to actually move in the beginning, a pawn has to be moved for a space to be opened up for it to move out. But it can also, it's just like any other piece. If there's a pawn or if there's any piece of my opponent's, any one of my opponent's pieces on the space that I can move into, then I can take that piece. So again, unlike checkers where you jump over pieces, you just move into the space and take the piece. But yes, the bishop can move any amount of spaces in any direction that is diagonal. Now we will talk about the bishop. Okay, so the bishop can move any amount of spaces in any diagonal direction. So I can move any amount of spaces this way. I can move any amount of spaces this way after I've moved to this space. Basically, any direction that is diagonal, I can move as many amount of spaces as there is an opening. So this is just like the other pieces. If there's a pawn in the way, it can't get out. So it can't move right now until the pawn is moved and the space is open for it to get through. So it needs an opening. It can't jump over pieces. But if there's a piece of my opponent's that's in my space or in my range, then I can take that piece. I can move to this space and take that piece, because just like I said, unlike checkers, you don't jump over pieces on this game. You actually take their space. So that is the bishop. It can move any amount of direction or any amount of spaces in any diagonal direction. Now we will talk about the queen, right? Now, everybody who knows anything about chess knows that this is the most powerful piece on the board, right? Most powerful piece on the board. And that is because the queen can move any direction, any amount of spaces. So I can move here. Oh, that's off the board. I can move here. 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 Any direct. Now, once you have chosen to go one direction, you have to continue going that direction. So I couldn't go like this or something, but any amount of spaces in that direction the queen can go, as long as there's nothing in the way, because the queen also cannot jump over any pieces. So in the beginning, again, she cannot move because the pawns are in the way and everything is in her way, so something has to be opened up. But again, just because she can move in so many different directions, she's a very powerful piece. So if any piece is in the way, it can get taken. But because she's so powerful, you definitely want to be careful with how you move her, because you don't want to lose her. So that's definitely something that you want to keep in mind. But yes, that is the queen, the most powerful piece on the board. Any amount of directions, or any direction, any amount of spaces. Now we will talk about the final piece, which is the most important piece on the board. So although the queen is the most powerful, this is the most important piece, which is the king. Now, the reason why this is the most important piece is because everything is centered around, the whole game is centered around the king. The way that you win the game is by putting the king in a position where it can't get out of danger. That's how you get checkmate. So the king can move any direction, but it can only move one space. So it's not limited in direction, but it's very limited in the amount of spaces it can move, which is really because you don't really want to move it that much, because it's such an impactful and important piece. You're really trying to protect it. So you're not trying to move the king that much. You're just trying to keep the king protected. So the king is the most important piece because it deals with check and checkmate. So an example of check would be if the king is in danger like this. So we know the knight can move over 1 up 2. So right now the knight could take the king, which would be check. If check happens, the only thing that the opponent can do is get out of check. So I can't move any other piece. Everything is stopped. Everything has to come to a halt. And the only thing I can do is figure out how to get out of check. So I'd have to move here, or I'd have to move here, or I'd have to move here. I'd have to move somewhere that got me out of check. Now, checkmate would be where I was not able to get out of check. An example of checkmate would be, I'll do this on my side. This would be an example of checkmate, because you cannot actually, because of the fact the king is so important, you can't actually put the king in check. So if this is where the only thing that you could do to get out of check, well, this would actually, let me do this over. So if this would be the only thing that you could do to get out of check, would be to take the queen, but the bishop is protecting the queen, which would mean that if you took the queen, the king would still be in check. That would be an example of checkmate, because there's no way to get out of check. So that's the end of the game. That's the goal of the game, is to actually put the king in checkmate. So that's why it's the most important piece on the board, because everything is centered around that. So the overall goal is to get checkmate. Oh, and one more thing, a very important thing that I almost forgot to include as to why I say the pawn is actually a very impactful piece. Because let's say sometime during the game I lose my queen, or really if I lose any of the pieces besides the pawn. If I get my pawn to the other end of the board, so let's say we're further in the game and these pieces aren't in the way or something of that nature, any way, shape, or form, if I can get my pawn to the other end of the board, then it can become whatever piece I lost, including the queen. So it's actually really powerful, because it can become any piece. Along with that, it can also, like, let's say you already have a queen. If you lost your rook, then this could become another queen. You could have 2 queens on the board, because once the pawn got to the other side, it could become the second queen by turning the rook upside down. So now you have 2 queens, which is even more powerful. So the pawn is a very powerful and impactful piece as well. But that's something I definitely want to make sure I included. Okay, and lastly, we will talk about the move called castling. Now, this move is pretty much like a it's more like a advanced move, you know, kind of like a special move that you would make. So as you're learning the game, it's not that important, but I'm going to include it because it's a part of the rules. So this one is called castling, but it's not something that you really need to focus on when you're first learning the game. So basically what you do is, all you do is you move the bishop out of the way and you move the knight out of the way, which allows you to have the two spaces between the king and the castle or the rook. They're now open. So now this allows you to do, as long as the king is not in check and as long as neither one of these pieces have been moved. If your king or your rook has been moved, then you can't do it. And if your king is in check in the moment, you can't do it. But as long as neither one of those are, happening and the spaces are open, you can do castling, which is where you move next to the rook and then you move the rook next to the king, which allows the king to be more in the corner and protected and allows the rook to kind of be more on the outside access versus the inside corner. So that is castling, and that's pretty much the the secret move of chess. And you have to, like I said, you can't do it if you're in check or if either one of the pieces have been moved. So yeah, man, that's the basics, chess 101. You feel me? It's a great game for building your mind. If you own a business, it's absolutely something you should put into your daily practice. Just in general, honestly, it can amplify so many different qualities in your life just because it influences so much of your mind. You feel me? So definitely want to get that into your everyday practice. So you guys let me know. I will be teaching more on strategy, of course, in later videos and all that good stuff. But if you really want to learn the game and really want to be able to utilize it to build your mind and build your consciousness, then we should schedule a session to really get the one-on-one in. You feel me? Let me go ahead and teach you one-on-one. I'll break down all the different ways that you're moving on the board and how they're correlated to different things that you do in everyday life and how you can fix them on the board so that you reconfigure that pattern and fix it in everyday life. You feel me? But you guys just let me know. You know what I'm saying? Thank you for tuning in. Share it. You feel me? Tell your people. Help them get a stronger awareness for the game as well. Subscribe, like I said, because I'm gonna be dropping plenty gems and plenty content. I appreciate you guys. Peace and love.